Today, I want to talk about the experience of how to have a conversation with someone who thinks differently than you do. And this can happen in a work relationship, a marriage. This can happen certainly over politics, religion. Like we see this playing out in the world all the time. But you know that experience when someone says something to you and everything in your body's like, hell no. I think that we probably experience this most in our primary relationships because those are the folks that are closest to us and allow us to be triggered and therefore see ourselves deeper. But this, responding from that place isn't going to help move the conversation forward. So let's talk about what will help move it forward and how to have a real constructive conversation with someone who thinks differently than you do. So first thing is to recognize when you're triggered. So when someone says something to you and you feel that, sort of rush of emotions and you are about to give the greatest speech that you'll ever regret. Everything seems so smart and clear and you're just going to cut that person a new, right? Like that's the feeling that when you feel that, time out. That is the first step. Anything from that place is not going to work out. This is really important in your primary relationship, or if you have a marriage, you're not going to get to closer intimacy, vulnerability, connection from that place, period. That's just not how it works. That's not where that place goes. If you're in a work relationship or you're talking to a stranger about politics, if you're trying to change someone's mind to think about you and you start responding from that place, it's just not going to work. None of those things work. What that place does, the amygdala hijack, right, is the big word for it, is you're in your reptile brain. So you can fight, you can freeze, you can flight, run away, or you can fawn, please. But these are the only capabilities of that piece of your brain when it's triggered. So the first thing is take a time out, say, if you can say, hey, can we come back to this tomorrow? If you can't, say, you know what, I need to use the restroom real quick. Whatever you have to do to get out of that situation and get yourself back in your cortex. A great way to get back into your cortex is to ask your thinking brain a question. So some good questions are, what do I want for me right now? And then what do I want for this other person right now? And then what do I want for this relationship? Because the answers to those questions should guide your next actions. So if your answers to those questions are something like, what do I want for me? Well, I want to be right. And what do I want for them? Well, I want them to feel like a piece of shit. Like, okay, then like you're still in your reptile brain. So when you ask yourself those questions, you're trying to get to the point where you're like, okay, I really want to feel heard and understood. What do I want for them? I actually want them to feel heard and understood too. What do I want for this relationship? I want us to be better teammates, whatever it is, right? But get to that place where you have some constructive answers to those questions so that you can move forward with attention and intention. So let's talk about what that looks like. So you've taken the pause, the most important. The second thing is listening, such an undervalued skill in our culture. So this means sitting back and asking the person questions until you feel like you get it, you know what it's like to be in their shoes. So during this time of active listening, you're not thinking about what you're going to say. You're not thinking about how you're going to respond. You're not thinking about how you're going to prove them wrong. You're listening to understand, not to prove wrong, not to one up. So when you listen to understand, you are taking in not only the person's words, but their body language, anything you know about their past history, and you are asking questions and checking in and saying, okay, so I hear you saying XYZ, is that right? Okay, well, would that be like this? Is this what you mean? And they say yes or no. And you're doing that investigation back and forth with them until they say something like, oh my God, like you understand it better than I do. You couldn't have said it better. Once you get that kind of response from the person on the other side of you, you know that you have been a good listener and you have heard them. Then, and only then, is it your turn to respond to the conversation? Because how can you possibly respond intelligently without understanding where they come from? So now it's your time to share your position. So my first suggestion here is be aware of your energy, because energy communicates. We all know this to be true. When someone thinks that you're dumb or doesn't like you, you can feel that even if their words are saying something different. So you're aligning your energy and your words to communicate your message. And then as far as the actual blocks of communication, words, you want to be careful which words you choose. You always want to stay away from always, never. You don't want to label people and say, well, all those people are bums, or that person's a crybaby, or that's the liberal agenda, right? You don't want to use these words that could be triggered words. You want to keep your language neutral so that you have a better chance of being heard and understood. It's also a good idea to stay away from any sweeping generalizations about a person or a group of people. So this sounds like, well, all Republicans think blank, all Christians are blank, right? All liberals are whatever that, again, you could call it labeling, but grouping of people under a certain header. So it's good to use expansive words when you're talking. This means that you are allowing others to be exactly who they are and acknowledging them for that instead of shooting on them. I would stay away from sarcasm because this is often misunderstood. So it doesn't really have place in, this is what I would call like a compassionate or intentional conversation. You can use your sarcasm with your buddies or your friends or people who understand you and think like you. But when you're having a conversation with someone who doesn't think like you, keep sarcasm out of it. And of course, you want to offer respect to the person that you're communicating with, because respect is like the oil in an engine. Without it, the gears just aren't going to keep moving smoothly. And then you check in with the person and don't expect them to be the same listener that you were. You're not being a good listener uh, with the caveat that they're a good listener back. You're being a good listener because that's how you want to show up as a human, right? So if they're not being a good listener, then you can go back to asking questions like, this is how I feel, this is my position. What do you think about that? How does it feel when you hear those words that I'm saying? And involve them more in little bits of your conversation. If at any time you feel that kind of triggered again, it's time for a timeout again, because you want to stay in your cortex and your working brain. One final thought that I'd like to add here is that we seem to have cultivated over the last couple years this culture of thinking that people who think differently than us are bad, wrong, evil, whatever it is that we want to label them. And when we sit in that place, we limit possibilities. Those kinds of belief systems, that person is this way, like you can feel it. They're very stale, they're very styrofoam, they're firm belief systems, versus believing that someone can always change, that acceptance and love is a quicker path towards that person transforming than hate is. I know for myself, when I was a very young girl, I thought very differently. And I'm so grateful for those who took the time to love me into growing into a better and healthier version of myself. One story that I absolutely love that is a great example of this is Daryl Davis. If you're not familiar with it, I've included the link to the story below. Have fun conversing out there, guys. It's fun when you get into it. So make it a challenge and try to become the best communicator that you know.